Today's show is an interview with Harold Kinker, a retired Ohio pharmacist. You're listening to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, a journey-style podcast about my career pivot from pharmacist to voice actor. I'm your host, Kim Newlove. I alternate solo shows and interview shows. The solo shows are about my career change, and the interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate, educate, or entertain. Thank you for joining me for episode 5, an interview with Harold Kinker, retired Ohio pharmacist. This interview was recorded on November 6th, 2019, and I want to give you a little bit of backstory about Harold and how I know him. When I joined the staff of Walgreens store 5323 in Toledo, Ohio in 2002, Harold was the pharmacy manager. He was the best kind of boss to work for. I felt included in the culture of the store right away, and he was a role model who set a good example through his actions and never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Harold was a mentor and became a friend. Almost 20 years after meeting, we are still friends, and we go out to lunch with a group of current and former Toledo-area Walgreens pharmacists several times a year. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy catching up. When I started at Harold's store, I worked full-time on the midnight shift, 7 on and 7 off, for about 12 months. For anyone who isn't familiar with the term 7 on, 7 off, it means that I worked 1 week and then had the following week off. I worked from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. Monday through Sunday, if I remember right. I put in 70 hours and got paid for 80. Counting vacation time, I was only required to work 25 weeks per year. But twice my partner Jim asked me to work on my off weeks to cover his vacation. If you do the math, I worked 21 days in a row on midnights twice that year, and both times I was pregnant. I was 24 years old, and I can honestly say that I don't think I could do that now that I'm in my 40s. When I became a mom, I needed to step down to part-time, and Harold had my back. I wanted to stay at the same store, and he helped me find a way to make it happen. Thanks, Harold. Harold was great with the pharmacy and store staff, and our patients liked him. He had a way about him that was very likable, and in our interview, you're going to hear that. He's still got it. Without further introduction, here's my interview with Harold Kinker. I'm here today with Harold Kinker, retired pharmacist. And how are you today, Harold?
Fantastic.
Great. Thanks for coming out today to be on my podcast.
Oh, it's interesting.
We've known each other for a few years, haven't we?
Oh, yes, we have. You worked for me and at Walgreens and, did a great job.
Thank you. Yep, you were my first boss at Walgreens, and you were a good one, for sure.
Oh, thanks.
Yes. Well, the reason I invited you to be on the podcast today is that I'd like you to talk about how you knew it was time to retire.
Okay. Well, I started out in pharmacy basically in 1968 as an intern for Walgreens, and I spent 2 years with them at Miracle Mile, working with 2 pharmacists, and I was essentially the third pharmacist because the first day I filled my first prescription and handed it to the pharmacist on duty, and he looked at it and said, "What's that for?" I says, "Well, don't you want to check your work? I've never worked with you before." He says, "Son, we don't have time for that. We're too busy." He says, "Check it twice and hand it out." And that was it. That was the last time I ever had a prescription reviewed by a pharmacist.
Oh, my. Well, now, where's Miracle Mile for anybody listening that doesn't know?
Okay, Miracle Mile's in West Toledo. It's the corner of Jackman and Lasky. There's a shopping center there, one of your strip centers. And eventually they sold that store to a company called Lane Drug, which now is part of Rite Aid. And, everybody seems to consolidate.
Yes. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions and name changes over the years.
Absolutely. And now I see that Walgreens is thinking about going private.
I hadn't heard that.
That was in the paper today.
Oh, I haven't read that.
But it was on the news yesterday. So I can imagine what that's going to do to people that own Walgreens stock. I've owned Walgreens stock in the past. It was fine. made a little money with it. But I one of my first bosses, Mel Wilzinski, who's, bless his soul, passed away now, was one of my mentors, and he taught me a lot. And I know that man had millions of dollars in stock when he passed away.
Wow.
So it was a good company, but it's changed. Pharmacy's changed. And that's why I knew it was time to retire.
When we were working together, you kind of hinted at retirement for a while, and then you finally did it. And what year was it that you retired?
Well, I actually called it quits probably January, February of 2012. In 2011, about halfway through the year, I slid into part-time. And prior to that, I don't know, 6, 7 years before, I went to midnights. Now, when I was working with you, were you a midnight pharmacist at that time?
When I first started in 2002, I was a midnighter, 7
Okay.
on, 7 off, and I was
Jim Lambert?
pregnant the entire time for my first year. I worked with Jim Lambert. He was my partner. So
Okay.
when he needed a week off,
Yeah.
I worked 21 days straight on midnights.
Exactly.
Yes, it was
Exactly.
crazy.
So, somewhere in the 2005, 2006, one of my midnight pharmacists decided he was moving to Akron, Ohio, and so I said, I've been a manager for years, and I'm ready to just slow down. So I went to midnights, and at that time, Donna Spencer was our supervisor, and she said, "Well, I'll have to move you over to Monroe and Secor." I says, "No." And she says, "What do you mean? We don't leave, pharmacy managers in their store when they step down." And I says, "Look, I know the customers, I know the staff." I says, "I'm comfortable there. I'm not going to interfere with whoever you put in as manager. I don't care what they do." I says, "If I do, you have every right to pull me out. But until that happens, I just want to stay in my own store." So she allowed that. And so I did.
You did a lot when I was there. You did more than just being a pharmacy manager. I remember you used to make the vacation schedule, and you did other little things, scheduling the floaters.
I scheduled all the floaters.
Yep, covering sick calls sometimes, right?
Yep.
You were MVP.
I did a little bit of everything, but I had a good supervisor back then, Tom Shepard, and he and I got along really well. I did a lot of things for him too, like interviewing pharmacists. He would, call me up and say, "Hey, I got this guy that's looking for a job. I want you to interview him, and if you like him, let me know, and I'll come down and talk to him." And I would, and on occasion, I can remember one instance, he sent me a pharmacist or gave me a name, and I says, "I can't talk to that person. I know all about him, and I wouldn't recommend him." He says, "That's all I need to hear."
So as you got towards retirement, you're saying you were full-time.
I was full-time.
Plus doing all these other extra things, and then worked your way down to part-time.
Well, once I went midnights, actually when Tom left and Donna Spencer took over, was about the time I said, I don't want to do this scheduling anymore. The store was getting too busy. When we were only filling less than 100 scripts a day, it was one thing. But now all of a sudden you're doing 300 a day. I says, I just can't keep up with this, So eventually they took that into the corporate office or the district office and had people that were just schedulers. And so I was able to give that up. And of course, while I was on midnights, I didn't do anything. Working that midnight shift was great. I wish I'd have done it years before. I never read so many books in my life. Well, I'd get all my work done, and what are you going to do? 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's no business or anything going on, and I'd have a book with me. So I'd sit down on a stool and read a book, waiting for customers. And 4 o'clock would come around, and I would have some things to take care of, and I'd do that. And yet, the nice thing was I stayed at my store where I had trained the technicians. They knew what they were supposed to do. I came in at 10 o'clock. Everything was done. Vials were filled, whatever. I talked to other midnight pharmacists a lot on the phone, and they were always complaining that nobody ever does anything here. The technicians don't do squat. Well, I says, you got to train them. But, somewhere, I don't know, 2008, 2009, I was getting close to retirement. I'm lucky that I turned 65 when I did. And I called it quits shortly before 65. Well, actually, I turned 65 that year, but
it worked out, and
it worked out. I started thinking about this, and a lot of the reason I called it quits was pharmacy was dramatically changing. It was one thing, we started giving flu shots and pneumonia shots, and that was fun. I enjoyed doing that. I'd sit down with people and say, which arm do you want the pain? And I had a lot of people say, well, that's the best shot I've ever received. And I said, well, I try. But, then they wanted to start us into giving all kinds of shots. Well, and then they wanted us to do A1Cs, and they wanted us to do lipid panels, and they wanted us to do, blood medication
checks.
therapy reviews and stuff like that. And I'm going like, this is like I'm turning into a nurse practitioner. And I says, I'm not trained for that, and when I was in school, so I was in school from 65 to 70, and one of my professors, Doc Schlembaugh, said that, when patients ask you, what is my medication for? You say, well, you need to talk to your doctor, or what did you go to your doctor for? Because so many things are used off-label. He says, you can't tell a person that, say, is taking Inderol, that went into their doctor because they're having headaches, that, well, it's for heart palpitations. And, and I can recall that happening once, and the next thing you have is a phone call from a doctor saying, why in the heck are you telling my patient that she's got heart palpitations? I'm using it for headaches. So, and he says, if they persist and say, why is it, what am I taking this for? You say, well, it's always used for the treatment of syphilis. And they'll take it and walk away.
Oh, my.
So,
But pharmacy really changed from the time you graduated in 1970 until you retired
in 2012.
42 years later?
42 years.
Wow.
Really 44 years of pharmacy. And so, yeah, it was, I thought, I'm not qualified to do this. In fact, I never ever carried, professional insurance in my life. Because, we're always covered by the company that you worked for, whether it was Walgreens, Perry Drugs, Pharmor, whatever. But when we started giving shots, I thought, this is time for me to start taking out insurance against myself just in case. I remember the first flu shot I gave. What had happened is that, I had forgotten that we were using disappearing needles, that once you gave the shot, the needle ejected, back into the syringe. I gave that first woman her shot, and then I pulled that away from her skin, and there's no needle. And I broke it off.
Uh-oh.
And then, and then the light flashed, and I said, oh, no. Put a little Band-Aid on there. You're all good to go. But, you kind of get scared a little bit.
Harold, you've got some great stories, and I know you had a long career. Was there anything other than working as a traditional pharmacist in a community pharmacy that you did?
Yeah. In 2004, when I was at a Toledo Academy of Pharmacy meeting, a young pharmacist there got up in front of the group, and he said that the Ohio 1 DMAT team needed a pharmacist. He had been their pharmacist for the last year or so, and his wife was graduating from school. They were moving to Colorado. He says, if there's anybody interested, So I thought, hey, that sounds like an interesting.
What does DMAT stand for?
Disaster Medical Assistance Team.
Okay. And what do they do?
They go to, whenever there's a disaster, like a hurricane, earthquake, something like that, a major disaster where a lot of the basic infrastructure of the area has been destroyed, they go in and set up like field hospitals. So I went to a meeting and talked to the people there, interviewed with them. I guess they liked me. They handed me an application about a half-inch thick and said, fill this out, get fingerprinted.
Wow.
And return it. And, because we were federal employees. So I did. I went over to the police station, got fingerprinted, turned it in, and a month or so later, I got my ID card. I still have it at home. It's not any good anymore, needless to say, but I kept that. And my first deployment was Hurricane Katrina. And then a couple weeks later, I went to Hurricane Rita. And then for a couple years, we didn't do anything. And then we had a couple more hurricanes down in Texas. But it was a unique experience, and you got to use your head more so, because a lot of the doctors would come back and say, do we have this drug? I got a patient out there that's taking X. And I'd say, no, we don't have X, but we can deal with it with Y. And, and I would make suggestions, and they'd say, great, give me some. They would come back, do you have this kind of insulin? I said, no, but we can at least get their blood sugar down because I got regular, and they would work that out. And it was quite interesting. And I got to do a lot of neat things with the DMAT team, too, as far as training.
Yeah. I remember your stories about gas masks.
We I went to Anniston, Alabama, where I went in what's called the hot tank or the Cobra tank. And I'm really proud of that because there, after you got suited up and you're fit tested for your mask and you're in all this heavy gear, you walk in a room and they close the door and a couple of technicians come in and they start pouring sarin in these trays, and then we had to test it. And then after they were done, they neutralized it. We walked to the next room and they come in and they put in VX. So two of the most deadly chemicals for mass, killing, I was in the room with. So that was interesting.
That is a heck of a story.
It was.
Wow.
And
you lived to tell the tale.
I got my little Cobra pin and my Cobra, challenge coin. I'm proud of those. We went out to Mercury, Nevada, where we did nuclear testing, and training for that in case there was ever a nuclear disaster. And that's an interesting place, It's hard to get in there.
And you're allowed to talk about this, right?
Yeah, there's nothing, but you drive down the road for 10 miles and all over is these huge holes in the ground where they did, tested nuclear bombs. When they explode that bomb underground, then the ground just caves in.
Wow. That's not something a pharmacist would typically be involved with.
I could say there's very few people in the country that have done some of the things that I've done.
And that's very interesting.
And it was a great team. Our team was one of the top teams in the whole country. Now it's changed. I've been to a meeting since, and they say you wouldn't want to come back.
What year would you say you got involved in that?
2004.
Okay. And when did you call it quits on that?
2012.
When
I was retiring, I knew that I wasn't going to keep my license. I wasn't really keeping up with pharmacy per se because I'd already gone part-time and I really didn't care anymore. And I just went into a meeting and I said, I'm here to tell you that I'm resigning, and turned in my notice, as we had to do that. You were a federal employee. You couldn't just quit. You had to give notice. I said, sometimes you have to know when to fold them, know when to hold them, and now it's time to fold them. And I gave away all my gear that I had, because we purchased a lot of our own gear. So, they gave you uniforms, but everything else you went out and bought on your own. And I had some unique things that I gave away.
That's generous of you. Now, how did that work with your regular job at Walgreens to be part of DMAT and also be employed by Walgreens full time?
Okay. When I talked to the guys at DMAT, they said the first thing you need to do is talk to your company and make sure that it's okay that you join. I said, all right. So I talked to my supervisor, and he says, I don't know anything about it. Call corporate. So I called corporate. They said, never heard of it, don't know, but it's fine with us. And so I joined. Well, I had expected when I joined this team that I was not going to get paid, that whatever I did was on my own, and all of our training and everything was on your own time. We didn't get paid for that. The only time you got paid by the government was when you actually deployed. They called you up to go on a mission, and they didn't pay very well. But Walgreens considered that just like, say, National Guard duty. They would bring my, whatever I made on demand, if I said, I made $1,000 this week, then they would bring my pay up. They would match, so that I got a full paycheck. So I was happy.
Yeah, it sounds like it worked out for them and you.
Worked out very well.
Yeah, good for you.
Worked out very well.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. There was one time we were doing a training mission in Hagerstown, Maryland, where we had to go. It was in July, so it was hotter than all get out. And you had to go out and set up your tents. And there was, I think, maybe 4 teams that were there for this training mission. I know for a fact it was at least 3. And our team was quick to get everything set up. We had to go help the other team set up their gear. One of the first things that they told us when we arrived was they said, you see the set of woods over there? Don't go near that set of woods because that's where Camp David is, and you'll meet up with people that you don't want to meet up with. So, but it was so hot. And of course, every half hour we had to drink a bottle of water, to stay hydrated. We actually had one of our commanders actually went down. They had to stick a needle in him, and he should have known better. And so every half hour they make you drink a bottle of water, and every 3 or 4 bottles you had to add electrolytes to it. And then at night you went to bed, and every half hour you had to get up and go to the bathroom. All that water started coming out of your interstitial tissues. And then you had to hike about 100 yards across to a outhouse,
Oh, geez. Well.
But that's pretty much it, It was fun. It was fun. It was you were sad to see what happened to people, but our team camaraderie was just fantastic.
Yeah, that teamwork is such a awesome element to
Absolutely.
Working in a team and you being resourceful with your pharmacy knowledge in a time of crisis. They need you, and it's just beautiful to hear about how you all worked together and really helped people who were at their lowest.
Yeah, at Hurricane Katrina, we had a doctor because, you always didn't have a full complement of people. We usually did, or pretty close to it. But I can remember that, before that hit, my wife and I were up in Canada on a vacation, and I got up on Saturday morning, turned the TV on, and they just kept talking about how big this hurricane's getting and how massive it was and powerful. And our team was not on call that month, but I told my wife, I says, I got a bad feeling about this thing. I says, let's get in the car and head for home. And so we drove straight back to Toledo, and I was not in the house more than half an hour when my AO called and says, Harold, we've been put on standby. Can you go? And I says, yeah, I'm in. And the next morning I got up and I'm pacing back and forth in the house, and wondering what's going on. And so finally I put my uniform on, told my wife, I says, I'm going to grab my gear. I'm going to the warehouse. And just to see what's what, if nothing's happening, I'll be back home. Otherwise, this might be the last you see of me for a couple weeks. And I walked in, the warehouse was right down the street. And I walked in and said, Jim, what's going on? And he holds up a piece of paper, said, just came off the fax machine. We've been called up. We're looking for 35 flights. And they would, fly you in, and you would pre-stage and then sit through the hurricane, and then they would move you forward.
What an experience.
What an experience.
Yes. I think I remember you telling me that there were people that would rush the vehicles and try to get the supplies. Was it you that told me that?
That did happen to one team, California team that was down on Interstate 20. And at that time, my team we were still at LSU waiting for our instructions, which came later that day. And some of our team members went out and rescued them. The people were in fear that, they were going to be overrun. And so they drove trucks out and picked them up and brought them home. A few days later, when they went back, everything was still there. Nobody had taken anything. They wanted help. While we were, I was in Covington, Louisiana, our team was on our own. And we were in a high school that was used as a shelter. So there was a hospice in there, a nursing home. People came in for treatment. And we had all these patients that were coming in, and they would say, "Yeah, had an episiotomy here a couple years ago when I had a baby, and my doctor gives me OxyContin for the pain." Next guy'd come in and say, "Yeah, I stubbed my toe a couple weeks ago, and the doctor gives me OxyContin for my pain." Well, after a few of those, they figured out it was always the same doctor, and so the docs on the team wrote letters to Louisiana Board of Pharmacy. "You need to investigate this guy."
I bet you didn't expect that to happen.
No, and we didn't carry narcotics. I mean, the only thing I had was 100 Vicodin. I had lots of ibuprofen and aspirin, but, they give us 100 Vicodin. So you have a patient that had some pain, you could give them half a dozen and send them on their way.
I know what that's like with the people having pain and you don't have many resources, so you have to be very careful how you use it.
Absolutely.
Yes. I worked in a federal prison when I was in college, and the strongest we had was Tylenol number 3, and that was for somebody who had cancer. That's all they got.
That's all they got.
All right. Well, I'm going to go backwards here and kind of talk about the beginning.
In the beginning. Well, I was born in 1947.
No. In 2012, when you went part-time and then eventually retired.
I went part-time in 2011, July of 2011.
Okay.
2012, I got to January. I had 4 weeks vacation coming. Although it was, since you were part-time, it was, I got like maybe 20 hours for I used up that vacation time. Then I says, "I'm done."
Oh, okay. So the time between you going part-time and you resigning was only about 6 or 7 months. Is that right? Okay.
Yep.
I resigned in February of 2011. So you were shortly after me that you had left. My leaving was for a completely different reason. But once you left, did you ever work as a pharmacist in the traditional sense again? Did you go anywhere?
No. When I went part-time, basically what I did is I went relief. I gave, covered people that, had sick days that were on midnights, or I covered their vacations, or they needed a day off. The last 2 days that I ever worked was Christmas Eve and Christmas of 2011. 2 pharmacists in 2 of the stores had kids, and I've got kids, but they were all old kids. I didn't have anything going on. I says, "Well, I'll cover you so you can have those days off to be with your family." And then I hit 2012, collected my vacation time, and said, "Okay, I'm done." I remember that Donna said that, after you've left the company 30 days and you've pulled your 401k out and moved it into an IRA, call me up and I'll let you come back to work. Well, shortly after I left, I had a vacation. And when I came back from vacation, I sat down and I thought, I'm going to get stuck in a store that I'm not familiar with technicians that I don't know. Even if I get a technician, I might be in this, some of these stores didn't have technicians until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, or didn't have them at all. I says, I don't need that. And so I decided that, no, I'm never going to fill another prescription the day of my life. I gave up my license. It expired that year anyways. And I have not looked back.
In Ohio, we have to renew our licenses in September.
Right.
You left essentially in February.
I left in February. My license was still good until September. But, at that time, of course, we had to have 60 hours of continuing education. And I had only acquired, usually when I did CE, every year when I had to turn in, I would turn in over 100 hours. I just collected all kinds. Well, when I got to, that summer, I only had like 52 hours. I needed 8 more. So I sat down at my computer one day to do a drug topics CE, brought it up, read about a paragraph, says, "Oh, this is terrible." I shut it down. I says, "My license is going to expire on September 15th. And that was it. I was done. And I've a lot of pharmacists I know that have retired, have hung on to that license forever and ever and ever, practical till they went to their grave. And I said, I'm never gonna fill another prescription. I would rather be a greeter at Walmart, than fill prescriptions.
Any regrets?
No regrets. Not one. Not one.
Awesome. Well, what have you been doing with yourself since you retired now 7 years ago?
7 years ago, yeah. 7, 8? Yeah. Well, when I knew I was going to need something to do, all right, one of the things that I did was I became a volunteer trail patrol walker for our Metro Park system. So I've done that now for 8 years. I'm in my 8th year. They ask you to volunteer 50 hours a year. I average over 200. I have a lot of partners that I walk with, and so I like to get out and walk 2-3 times a week. A couple hours here, a couple hours there. Our metro parks are beautiful. Probably they're considered maybe as a system one of the best in the country.
That's the Toledo Metro Parks.
That's the Toledo Metro Parks, Toledo-area Metro Parks. And I even know of people that have moved away from Toledo and moved back because wherever they moved to didn't have a nice Metro Park system. So that says a lot. And then this year, there's a thing called the Veterans History Project, which is a program that was designed by the Library of Congress in the year 2000. And the object was, of course, to interview World War II and Korean War veterans to save their stories for the future. And we're losing these guys at the rate of about 300 a day. They figure there's maybe 500,000 left in the country, and within 5 years we'll be down to 100,000. They're hard to find. Another gentleman, Bud Fisher, did these interviews for many years. And this year he was kind of, his health was poor that he couldn't get around and do them. And they asked me if I would take over as an interviewer. So I have been doing interviews for it.
That's really interesting. If someone wanted to offer themselves for an interview, a World War II veteran, Korean War veteran, Vietnam War veteran, Any veteran.
I actually, one of the interviews that I did was a young fella who served 2 tours of duty in Bosnia. And he had, when he got done with his basic training, he went to Monterey, California, learned Russian, went to the language school there, and then went to interrogator school, then went to Fort Bragg to be assigned. His unit was assigned to the 82nd Airborne. He wasn't in the 82nd. He was just, a support unit, 501st, PSYOPs Battalion. And so he spent 2 tours in Bosnia. Then he decided to become a paratrooper, so he started jumping out of planes. And it was my son, my youngest son.
I did not know that.
And I heard stories that he told that, wow.
And so you got to interview your own son.
So I got to interview my own son.
That is awesome. And how would someone find out more about this if they wanted to participate or be interviewed?
Well, I'm sure you could probably just Google Veterans History Project. And information would come up on it. Now, depending on where they live would depend on whether or not there's even a person there that does interviews. Now, we do them here in Toledo, and I believe there's a fellow that does them in Perrysburg. Not sure if he still does. We videotape them. So the veteran gets 3 copies of the videotape when it's done. And 2 copies go, one to the University of Toledo Kennedy Center for their records that can be accessed, and the last one with all the paperwork goes into the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
How many interviews have you done?
I've done about 18 this year, since February.
And over the course of your participation, how many have you done in total?
18.
Oh,
yeah.
18 in total.
I only started in February, so
this year you did.
Yeah, we're always looking for people. I've got 3 interviews scheduled coming up in December and the 1st of January. then we'll start looking for people come March because I'll be gone for a while. But it's, I've heard some really interesting stories,
And you enjoy it so much that you're going to continue doing it?
I will do it until my videographer decides that he's tired of it, and because he puts a lot of time in. I mean, I spend an hour with the person interviewing and talking to them, and then when it's done, I take a copy of it and I sit and after it's completed, then I rewatch it, I should say, at home and make notes that I send in with a video log. And then I keep one copy. And like I say, the veteran gets 3 and 2 go to the university. For me, it's, a couple hours of time maybe. But for the gentleman that does the videography, when we finish the interview, he'll spend 6 to 8 hours after that editing the whole thing and putting it together and adding background to it. And
I'm curious, how did you find out about this or want to participate?
Well, it's not that I found out about it. I play ping pong with a group of fellas, okay? And I've been doing that for a couple of years. And I met Bud Fisher, who was the original interviewer for the university, at lunch one time. We go to lunch on Thursdays, and then we go and play ping pong. And it just so happens that the person whose house we play ping pong at is the videographer. And when, he came to me one day and says, I have a question for you. He says, Bud's kind of doesn't want to do this anymore. Would you be willing to do the interviews? And I said, well, let me think about that. And he handed me a couple that they had done, and I took them home and watched them. And I thought, well, it doesn't look to be too difficult, so why not give it a try? So, yeah. So I go get my hair cut, and there's other people sitting in the barbershop. Any of you guys veterans? I got one that way, As soon as I have time, I plan on going out to the VFW post and see if I can't get some people that way. Friends that I've done say, well, I know a couple people that would probably do this, and it's just, kind of word of mouth, a lot of it, but it's just going out and, I got business cards and I hand them out and.
One of the things that I can do with this podcast is put a link to this Veterans History Project in my show notes,
okay,
so that listeners can click and, visit that site. So maybe you'll get a couple that way too.
That would be great. We try and do them in White House, Ohio. We like the veteran to come there because the workshop where we play ping pong, we've got a green screen. So everything's filmed in front of a green screen, much like, watching the guys on TV doing the weather. They're doing it in front of a green screen, so everything can be put on it. And so George, when he edits it, he puts in the background and adds his little, things to it that really makes it pop.
That's cool.
So, yeah. You can put my phone number down if you want,
Sure, if you want to give it out.
I'll give you my business card.
Okay. Is your phone number on your business card?
It is.
Okay. Do you want to give it out on the podcast?
Sure. It's 419-868-1950. And just ask for Harold. And if I'm not there, if somebody doesn't answer, but the phone just rings and rings and rings, it means my wife's on the phone with our kids and she doesn't switch over. And if neither of us are there, just leave a message.
Good enough. Very good.
Otherwise, keep trying.
There's something else that you do in your retirement that I would love for you to talk about, and it's something that takes you away from home, and you really enjoy doing it so much that you've done it many times. So what would that be?
Well, I would assume you mean cruising.
Yes.
Okay, my wife and I, like to take our vacations on a cruise ship. Not to say that that's the only way we've taken vacations, but, since I've retired, even prior to retiring, I think our first cruise was 2009, 2010. We did Alaska. That was our first. Gorgeous. We have done 15 cruises. In fact, tomorrow I leave for Rome, Italy to take another 21-day cruise that comes back to the United States, a transatlantic cruise. And, I think, well, geez, 15 cruises, that sounds like a lot. You get on these ships and you talk to people, and some of them, oh, yeah, I've been on 68 cruises.
Oh, wow.
I've been on 85 cruises.
Wow.
It's like, what did you do for a job? Because, well, I couldn't afford that, But, yeah, it's fun. We go with a group of people usually. A couple times it's been on our own because something happened that the people we were going to go with weren't able to make it. But tomorrow we've got a group of 12 of us, and next year we'll have a group of 16 of us, and who knows what 2021 brings. Maybe I can get Kim on one.
I would love to if someone would take care of my kids. But I do enjoy your stories, and whenever you come back, you are just so happy and excited to share what you've learned and all the trivia that you've gotten to play.
Things that I like. Yeah, I like to play trivia. Every day on board ship, they have trivia twice a day. Actually, they usually have a couple things at night too, but, I'm in bed at 9 o'clock. But I got up today at 4:30 in anticipation of this podcast. No, I'm kidding. I got to the point where we would play trivia, and no matter how well you did, there was always other people that just did way better than you did. And I come to realize that a lot of the same questions are over and over and over again. And so I have, on 4 of my previous cruises, asked the cruise director hey, can I do a session? I got my own 20 questions. And they usually let me. And so I'll get up there and give 20 questions, which are a little more difficult because it evens the field, so to speak. And you got these groups of people that have been on 60, 70 cruises. They've heard every question, 50 times. I mean, there was one instance where the morning cruise person came and gave their 20 questions, and the afternoon cruise person came and gave the same 20 questions. Come on. They've got like a bucket full of questions that they draw from, and so you hear them over and over and over again.
So you have enough to do on these cruise ships? You
Absolutely.
Never get bored?
I never get bored.
That's awesome.
Sometimes I'll just walk the ship. You can eat 24 hours a day. I'll probably come back 20 pounds heavier.
Just in time for Christmas,
right? Just in
right?
time for Christmas.
All right. Well, I'm going to go backwards in time and ask you a little bit about how you got into pharmacy. You went to what university?
I went to the University of Toledo.
How long was the program when you went? What years was that?
Okay, it was 5 years, 1965 to 1970. It's not what I originally was going to do. When I was in high school, I thought, well, maybe I'd like to be a doctor. Well, then the more I thought about it as I got to my senior year, I says, I'm getting tired of school. I don't really want to spend another 8 to 12 years or more, going to medical school. And so my counselor says, well, why don't you think about pharmacy? That's medical related. And I said, okay. So I got into pharmacy. Of course, back then it was a lot different. It's not like it is now. I mean, my graduating class was 40 students.
Wow.
I think there was 65 that started out, and 25 dropped out eventually after their freshman year. Once they got into chemistry, I came close. My first couple years in school, I didn't do real well. I was almost ready to drop out and join the Navy, but I was dating my wife, and she said, next year starts pharmacy classes, so stick with it. And once I got into pharmacy classes, I was, off to the races. Yeah, it was great. I had great professors. We only had about half a dozen at that time, and they were just fantastic. So, yeah, I made it.
Good for you.
And passed my boards. And, I got my license in Michigan. I had to take the state board twice. Did it over 2 days in Ohio. You did your practical one day, then everybody did the written. It was over a 3-day period. So either Monday or Wednesday you did your practical, which was a wet practical, where now everything is online. And then your written test was all day on Tuesday. Well, then I had to take the Michigan boards on Wednesday and Thursday. So I immediately drove from Columbus to Lansing and went in and took the Michigan boards. And they did it over 2 days written. You had to be a pharmacist or an intern up there 6 months after graduation before you could finish up and get your degree.
Or your license?
Your license, I should say. And so I took the exact same test 2 days in a row.
Oh, geez. And you said you had to take it twice. Does that mean Ohio and then Michigan?
I took Ohio and then drove up to Lansing, took the same exact exam on Wednesday and Thursday there.
Passed the first time, both states?
Both states. Did better in Michigan, though.
Oh, way to go. That is great that you passed. When I took my Michigan exam back in 2002, I actually had done better in Ohio than I did in Michigan, but that's just my experience.
Yeah. So, yeah, it worked out. And it was nice having 2 licenses. Walgreens paid for it. They were a good company. I mean, when I look back and I see students coming in, I have my interns, and I'd say, yeah, I went to pharmacy school for 5 years and it cost me $1,800. And they look at you like, I said, but 2 years, the last 2 years were paid for, so it cost me $1,800, and then my, 4th and 5th year was paid for by Walgreens. Otherwise, it would have cost me $2,400. I said, I can't even buy my books for that now.
Yeah, it's crazy, the change in the price of school. I went back in 1996 to 2001, and I think my total student loan debt was maybe $20,000 when I graduated. Now it's 7 times that.
Oh, yeah. What's a student loan? I didn't have student loans.
Yeah, that's right.
It was $300 a semester, and then when we went to quarters my last 2 years, so it was $205 a quarter to go to school. Walgreens gave you $200. Cost me $5.
Times have changed.
Times have changed.
Student loans was how I needed to do it.
I don't even think we had student loans back then. Well, it was cheap enough, and that's, the unfortunate thing now is, not only you've got to get your 4-year degree, for your Bachelor of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences, you're in great competition to move up, into pharmacy for your last 3 years. We look at it as a 6-year degree, but it's actually 7 because you go year-round. The students getting a PharmD degree now, Doctor of Pharmacy degree, are going 6 semesters. That's 3 years' worth of tuition at graduate student prices, which are double undergraduate student prices. So you just went from $8,000 a year, $10,000 a year to 20, and yeah, I can't figure out how people can do that. And now you don't even get full-time work when you graduate.
Things have changed.
Drastically. Never worried a day in my life for a job, ever. There was always a shortage. As long as you were a decent pharmacist. I remember Mel Wolzinski, like I said, he was a great tutor. He says, when I got ready to graduate, he says, I don't care who you work for, Walgreens, Lanes, whatever. He says, go out, work your butt off, make a name for yourself. He says, and that reputation will carry forward with you your whole life. As long as, you move from job to job, doesn't matter. You just work your tail off and improve yourself. And he says, conversely, you can be a slacker. He says, and that'll carry forward with you the rest of your life too. So I always worked hard. For many years, not only were we the pharmacy manager, I was a store manager. So I ran the whole store. That goes back a few years, in the 70s, early 80s, until they finally come to grips with the fact that you needed a pharmacy manager, you needed a store manager.
Yeah. Yep, things have changed. And so I'm going to end this interview by asking you for a piece of advice. So say you've got a college student or a new grad and they're looking to you for advice. What advice would you give them?
Well, I would hope they would ask me before they went to college, and I could say, don't go into pharmacy, unfortunately, because it's tough. I mean, it's a lot different. If they're just graduating, I don't know what, I don't have an answer for that. Just have to say, I'm sorry. I talk to pharmacists out there in the field now, and unless you're the pharmacy manager, you have full time. Everybody else is working less than 40 hours a week. And that's not just Walgreens, that's Kroger's and a lot of your other companies. And unless you're willing to move to an area like, say, Phoenix, Arizona, or Texas, or something where a lot of people are moving to, and they keep opening stores or needing pharmacists. If you're looking for it in town, it's not there because there are way too many. We have opened too many pharmacy schools. Let's face it. Our salaries really went up a lot in the 2000s, and high school students could look at that and say, ooh, I can make six figures when I graduate from pharmacy school. Not anymore. I mean, you still might be able to, but if you can't get full-time work, you're not going to. And if you're going to have $100,000 in student loan debt,
makes you think twice.
It makes you think twice.
For sure.
I know at one time when I worked for Perry Drugs up in Monroe, Michigan, one of my bosses, I think I had 4 sons at the time. I don't think I had my 2 daughters yet. And he came and asked me if any of my kids were going to go into pharmacy school. And I says, no, I'd rather shoot them and save them the agony.
Oh, geez, Harold. Well, and then I guess I'll end on a last question here.
Okay.
What would you say to somebody who's 60 to 65 years old, still employed as a pharmacist, and wants to retire? What would you say to them?
I don't know. I think the one thing you have to, when you call it quits, you have a lot of free time. So you need to be able to fill that free time. I filled it with the trail patrol, with the metro parks as part of it. I hope you saved enough money, and if you were, it's like one of the fellows that I worked with who we both retired at the same time, and then he continued to work part-time. And why? Why are you, doing this? Well, I just kind of like it. Well, I'm not a boss anymore. I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, there's a lot more fun things to do out there than filling prescriptions.
Do you love being retired?
Fantastic.
Awesome.
I never looked back, not one day in my life.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today for this podcast, and I will put contact information in my show notes.
Okay, great.
All right.
Maybe we'll get a few.
All right.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Harold. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacist Voice podcast with me, your host, Kim Newlove. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to subscribe and read the show notes. That's thepharmacist with an S, voice.com.